Welcome to episode 5 of the Objective Arete podcast. We're on a mission to help you achieve fulfillment and your greatest potential by enabling you to live with purpose, embrace adversity, and pursue Arete. I'm your host, Mike Lerario, and Joseph McCormack joins us today. Joe is the author of 3 best-selling books, Brief, Noise, and Quiet Works. He's also the founder of the Brief Lab. In this episode, you'll learn why it's better to be interested than interesting, how to be a better communicator, and why quiet is such an important part of getting the essential work done, especially in a world with artificial intelligence. Joe and his team at the Brief Lab are on a mission to change how we think about communication and work, all in meaningful and potentially disruptive ways. So let's get to it.
Joe, great to meet you. I have to say that I'm having kind of a fan moment here that I got to really fight back because since I first read Brief, I've been a big fan of that book and the other two to follow, although haven't read Quiet Work yet. Nearly met you in 2018 or 19. I was doing the Young Lions program with USASOC, and for some reason the trip out here didn't happen. But big fan. I think that next to my books and Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, your book, Brief, is the one I've given to more people than any other book.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a great book. So you wrote your books, Brief, Noise, Quiet Work, in that particular order. Is there a different order you'd recommend people read them in?
I mean, you could certainly read them in that order. I would read Noise first, because Noise sets up the environment that we live in. It really does describe the whole issue of focus and communication and clutter and distraction and where people tend to focus or misfocus their attention and squander it, and just how hard it is to kind of stay on a thing. And that really does kind of get a person starting to think about how difficult and competitive it is in the world, like in the competition of attention. There's a lot of noise that's winning people's attention with nothing to show for it. So I would start with Noise first, and then Brief, and then Quiet Work. And those two books really relate to each other in a very deliberate way, because what I've learned in the last 10 years, starting and running the Brief Lab, is that clear and concise communication it's super valuable across the table from a client or your boss or with your coworkers or whatever, and to be able to say what you need to say and not have an economy of that and not get lost in like the words can give people a lot of power. I'm establishing a plan, priorities, and there's clarity in that delivery, and it's very deliberate. It's incredibly powerful. What I found, though, over the years is that people will learn the skills, learn the tools, and then they'll kind of plateau out of it. So they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is so good, and I'm learning the before and afters. But you start to see like they're not getting better over time. Communication's a perishable skill, so people can get worse at it or better at it. But they can also kind of just sort of stay at the same level. It's kind of like learning a language. You're like, hey, I'm pretty proficient in French, but I haven't gotten any better at it. So I'm pretty much having the same conversations. And I started thinking about why that was the case. And when I was writing Noise, that I started really thinking about the absence of quiet during the workday to give people time to prepare. So I spend a lot of time training people in special operations. It's not the only people that we train. We train corporations like American Express and eBay and Microsoft and companies like that. But what's lacking in their day is any time to prepare the meeting that they're going to go into. Well, we all know, like if you don't prepare before you do something, you're kind of showing up, and nobody wants to say I'm winging it, but we're kind of winging it. In communication, when you wing communication, sounds scattered, and time alone makes the collaboration, which is Brief is teaching that better. So I would say Noise, Brief, and then Quiet Works.
Okay. I would have thought you would have recommended them in the opposite order, so I'm glad I asked that question.
But it's kind of like you could do it's like food, maybe do you want to start with dessert? I don't know, I'm not comparing one to dessert either. But no, you can, that would be in order. You could put either one.
I like that. I mean, I think that's, I heard you recently on one of the From the Green Notebook podcast episodes with Joe Byerly, who I think is brilliant. And to hear you talk about it as, in this story, Noise is the villain and quiet is your shield and Brief is your sword. I think those are great visuals and a great way to kind of frame this issue of, hey, communication is the foundation to everything we do. Get it right or get things wrong. I mean, everything that follows will go wrong if you don't get the communications right.
Absolutely. I think that, for your listeners and anybody thinking about leading, managing, being a professional, people spend a lot of time communicating. But most people, that's not going to be their moment. Like standing in front of a podium or on a stage, so like how to do like a TED presentation or whatever is a lot of like energy to like, I've used that thing very, very rarely. I think where people spend an enormous amount of time are like, hey, you got a minute over here, and I'm sending an email over there, and like all during the day, there's a lot of squandering of that. And what I've spending a lot of time thinking about is you're creating noise for people, for yourself. And you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think. I don't know what's important. It all just sounds like information. That's a fixable problem, but you got to start to think about like, well, how do I fix that communication? And I think we learn a lot from manufacturing, believe it or not. Like the whole movement of Six Sigma and Lean, like process improvement. Like back in the day where manufacturers were just like taking excess steps out of process to create like really deliberate, like cars back when I was a kid were like, they would always break. I don't know, like what was your experience, but like cars were, my parents were like, we'd turn the car on and like, oh, the starter wouldn't work and the thing would stop on the side of the road. And we had constant car problems. And it wasn't because like we were abusing the cars. It was just they weren't made very well. Nowadays, it's like the cars, generally speaking, are like made significantly better. Like you buy a car and it, for the first 4 or 5 years, it's probably not going to just randomly just not work for you. And a lot of that because they designed that whole process in a lean, deliberate, efficient way. Communication is the most undeliberate, inefficient thing that's going on in the workplace today that nobody even looks at.
This podcast episode was recorded in the Brief Lab. More importantly, we could not have built Objective Arete without the Brief Lab. We've done almost all of our planning and execution using the facilities to include their new quiet workplace. We use the quiet workplace to do all of our deep work, and we'll often spend up to 4 hours working in that space to allow complete concentration at the task at hand. Joe McCormack built the Brief Lab and has authored the books Brief, Noise, and his latest release, The Quiet Workplace. We have used the physical quiet workplace facility combined with the concepts of his new book to build his company. Check out the Brief Lab online at www.thebrieflab.com and grab a copy of his new book on Amazon. You won't be disappointed. Now, back to the show.
I think with a lot of my clients, I've found it very helpful to remind them that everything they do is a performance. Write an email, you're performing. Giving a PowerPoint presentation, you're performing. Getting on stage with a musical instrument is clearly performing, but so is that letter or memo you're going to write. And every performance has 4 stages in the cycle: plan, prepare, execute, review. Right? Most people don't do the review to get better the next time they have to plan, prepare, execute. Most people jump right into execution. And what I love about your books is the attention given to plan and prepare. Like put that effort in up front to make sure that you are clear and concise, not wasting people's time. You have to be informative, tell people something they don't know. You have to be interesting. And so this is the storyteller's thing. Maybe it's Carmen Gallo, I don't know, but you have to be interesting. You have to grab their attention. Attention is the point you make with noise. Then you have to be concise, clear and concise, and I borrow that from you. And then you have to be compelling, which is the Henry Kissinger thing, right? It's not enough to be right. You have to move somebody to action. And I think this is where most people miss out. And it's not usually a problem with execution. It's a problem with planning and preparation.
So it's I2C3.
I2C2.
Clear, concise, and compelling. That's the third.
Well, I don't want to
throw another number there, but like, hey, whatever.
Joe, I'll take it.
We're throwing ideas out there.
It just became I2C3.
So the thing about, I'm going to challenge you on a couple of those things, not because there's a right or wrong, but I think there's just a way of looking at it. I was reading a magazine, an airline magazine on Southwest Airlines years ago, and I'll never forget this article. This article is this like Jewish woman from New York, and she told her son, it's better to be interested than interesting. And I'm like, number one, that's a great line, right? But I'm like, all right, so I unpacked that a little bit. And what it turns out that one of the most underrated skills when communication is listening. To be interested makes you interesting because so many people spend all the time talking and not enough time listening. If I'm interested, I know about you and what motivates you and what you care about. And like everybody says, it's all about your audience when you're in this performance that you talk about. Well, I don't even know what my audience wants because I'm too busy performing for my audience. begs the question in planning and preparation is this need to be interested? It starts with like, it's not about me, it's about the person I'm talking to and what do they really care about? Now I'm speaking to what they care about. Now, that's one. I'm not saying, I think what you're saying about interesting is like compel people, like get their attention, win their attention, which is absolutely spot on. I think a lot of that has to do with your intention. Like, I don't want to compel you to do something. I'm not going to. So we have a line that we teach at the Brief Lab called "Tell me, don't sell me." And most people are like, well, I got to sell a person on this idea. And then what happens to the person is they shut down. They're not listening anymore because they're like, oh, you're trying to convince me to do something. I don't want to do that. I sense that you're trying to be persuasive. And my perspective is be clear, be concise, and you will be compelling. But don't try to convince the person. That is in that decision lies in them. Sure. And it's the payback for you being clear and concise. So I think the C3 thing, I think you're onto something.
For me, it's the compelling part is it's a call to action, or it's you move them to do something. Why would I send you an email if it wasn't for you to either be more informed or to make a decision? One of those two. And I should tell you that up front. I'm a big fan of using subject lines. Every subject line in every email ought to have one of these 3 words because there's only 4 types of email. It should either be info, decision, if to a boss, usually, hey boss, we need a decision, or request if I'm to somebody else that I need help with, right? The 4th one is spam, and you shouldn't be sending spam anyway. But like, those are the only kind of info or the only kind of emails that anybody should be sending out. So if you put that in the subject line, you're helping them out immensely. But the compelling part for me is, why did I send this to you? It's for you to do something, either to gather this information, to have this bit of information, to make a decision, or to help me with something I'm putting in a request for, or something I need help with. If it wasn't to ask you to do something, again, why I'm probably wasting your time.
If you communicate well, it's easy for a person to go there. So you don't have to like try that hard to do it. It's like one of the lines that I have in giving people advice about this is like in emails and things like that is ask people questions that end in the word yes. Can I send you some more information? Yeah. Can I give you some feedback? So it's simple questions with simple answers. And I would write an email and like, okay, well, how does the reader read the email? Is it easy to respond to this thing? Is it easy to follow the thing?
Sure.
That becomes in and of itself compelling. Like, oh my gosh, that was effortless. It was so easy to understand what you said. And it was so easy to reply to what you needed from me, is something that a lot of people struggle with.
We're sitting here in the Brief Lab in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and it's a beautiful space. It really is. My question is, did you envision this because you were working in marketing, right? Mm-hmm. And then the call for help came from Fort Bragg and the special operations community to get better at how they communicate. And so if I understand correctly, the Brief Lab you put here in Southern Pines because of that work.
Yeah, so I had a full-blown marketing agency, which doesn't exist anymore, but I had account executives and creative directors and video producers and writers and all that in Chicago to North Carolina to Fort Bragg to teach. And certainly it's kind of cool to be on a military base. I've never been in the military, so you go on a military base and you get badged in and you get go through security checks and stuff, and you meet a lot of cool people, and it's pretty amazing. The environment was wrong. A lot of the way people learn is a lot of it's based on the environment. If you think about like a dingy classroom with like terrible chairs and this is no offense against the military for anybody who might listen to the military, but the coffee on a military base is terrible. They're like, hey, you want a cup of coffee? And I'm like, sure. And then you hear like, let me see what I can find. That's never a really good answer. And then you open up a drawer and you see like 1,000 sugar packets, but there's no spoon. It's just like, all right, I'm going onto these bases teaching these classes, and then people are pulling out of the class because they've been tasked with something, and then I'm losing people, and they're not really paying attention because some dignitary just walked down the hallway, and I just had this impulse. This is like the year before Brief came out. It was like 2013. I'm like, I just want to build a place that's near enough to the base that people can come to, but the environment would be so different than anything that they've ever been in, that and my art director at the time, who had actually done some work with Oprah, who's really good at interior design, she did set design for Oprah. And we're like, let's just build a really cool classroom with like a kitchen and a lounge area. And we just lucked out. I mean, guys came and they're like, it's a little bit like I was like anticipating the need, but I'm like, if it's really that important, it should have its own place. And so I built it. And the first groups that came in, first impression, you walk in, you're like, oh my gosh, this place is awesome. And I'm like, I built it for you.
Quick word from one of our sponsors, Edge Mentality. Edge Mentality is owned and operated by CC Kraft, head of mental performance at the Philadelphia Phillies, and she's also on our board of advisors here at Objective Arete. They specialize in working with coaches, business executives, and leaders on managing high performers so they can get the most out of their athletes and employees. They also work with high performers individually and help them increase their performance under stress. I've personally worked closely with CC when she helped create the Special Operations Cognitive Enhancement Program at Fort Bragg, and she has definitely helped me excel in life. She is the best in the business. To find out more about Edge Mentality, go to our website at www.objectivearete.com and scroll down to the bottom of our homepage, click on the Edge Performance logo. Check them out. And back to the show.
So that you can learn this thing. And that went a long way, I think.
Two-part question. So the first one is it safe to say that the Brief Lab, or what brought about the Brief Lab, was a side hustle that turned into your main gig?
It was not supposed to be a side hustle, but it kind of was. It was a request that started multiplying. Like they wanted more of it. When they found that it was like not what they thought it was going to be, what they were learning was public speaking and like briefing. Like it was this very mechanical thing that didn't help anybody.
Never less than 18 point on your font. On your
right now, it was just exactly. It was was training that was not helping the thing at all. And, so when I started teaching the courses, the response was like, "Oh, can you do another one? Another one?" Well, that meant I was, stopping running this marketing agency, which was, I had like 25 people working there, to come down here, and the frequency was increasing to the point that I'm like, all right, this is actually a thing. So when I wrote Brief wasn't my idea. Brief was a request of somebody in the class. It wasn't even called Brief. It was called Strategic Communication, whatever name they gave it. They gave it some Army name, Stratcoms or some fancy name like that. And it was just me teaching what I did with my clients. Like, how do you speak to the board of directors? And how do you pitch Forbes magazine? And how do you talk to an analyst? And like all the stuff that I would do at corporations and tech companies and stuff. And when I came up with the idea of Brief, it was because people in the class were like, we need something to read. And this is what's cool about the special operations community in particular, is they really are learners. Like they really lean into learning. And if they see something valuable, they want more of it. So it was a compliment to me, but I realized, well, I gotta. And then at some point, some guy's like, man up, write a book. So I wrote Brief, which was hard because I had a day job, and it wasn't like they gave me an advance. There was no advance. It was just a deadline in 40,000 words or whatever it was, and I had to do it on the side. So it was a side hustle until it became too difficult to manage two different businesses, and then I let the Brief Lab grow to replace that marketing agency.
So what did that look like, if you could think back to it at the time? I mean, what were you thinking when you were making the decision about, do I stay with the marketing or do I go with this thing that seems to be...
Okay, so this is, I know enough about flying because I've taken some flight lessons and enough about aircraft to be dangerous, but maybe this is a good or bad analogy. It was like having two engines on a plane, and one was outpowering the other one, and the plane started yawing. It was flying weird. And I thought I was a great manager. Like I can just get the left engine to operate just like the right engine was. Well, the right engine, the Brief Lab, was more powerful. It was more needed than the other one. And the other one was good. But the plane started flying sideways. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but it was just kind of like, and I'm like, at some point I can't do both. The one was exceeding the other one. And that was very difficult for me to do because I had to let one business decline while the other one was growing inside of it simultaneously. And it was among the most difficult things I've ever done. I would never want to do it again, actually. I probably could do a business case study on it, but it was just like they were similar, but one was like a marketing agency and was a training company. And they were similar in what they talked about, but very different in delivery.
We're thankful that you decided to go with the right engine.
Every time I get asked back, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's still working.
I want to quickly talk about the sponsor of this episode, Green Hat Solutions. Green Hat is a veteran-owned, North Carolina-based cybersecurity, video security, and IT company. Green Hat takes care of all of our network and security requirements at Objective Arete, and I use them personally for all my home network security and surveillance needs. If you find yourself in need of a network professional, check out Green Hat Solutions at www.greenhatsolutions.com. That's www.greenhatsolutions.com. Now back to the show.
So real quick then, I guess, kind of circle back on your books, the 3 books you've written. 1 or 2 tips on either the combined volume of work or each piece of that, someone who hasn't read your books, what would you say to them just to either move them in that direction or say, okay, we don't have time. Here's the most important
Well, the first disclaimer is I've never been and I never will be in the business of trying to sell books because I do it because they were needed, and I would never do it if I didn't. I was a reluctant author, and I still am. And so in each book, there's something, and I'll just so in brief, the core idea in brief is something called an executive summary. And I ask this question to everybody that I teach, and the question is, have you ever heard? It's a 3-part question. Have you ever heard of an executive summary? They're like, yeah. And, in the military, they call these X-sums. Have you ever heard? Yeah, I heard them. Have you ever had to deliver one? Yeah. Has anybody ever taught you how to build one? I've asked this question to thousands of people. Not at once, but like over years. And I always get yes, yes, no. And these are intelligent people. These are not people that just showed up yesterday, just like roll out of bed. They've heard this term in an executive summary. It's a pretty broad term. They've delivered them all the time, but nobody's ever taught them how to build them. So the core idea in brief is an executive summary is, in order, what are you saying? Like, what is the point of what you're saying? You're making a recommendation. What's the recommendation? Next question is, why are you making it? Like, why would I care? Then there might be some information, and then there's a so what. Okay, so what should we do? And you look at that form, that's an executive summary form that I learned in marketing, working for a big agency and starting my marketing agency. That's a very predictable, clear form that nobody's ever been taught. You'll hear books like Start With Why by Simon Sinek. They're good books, but they're good titles, but that's not actually the form. You don't really, you need to know what your why is, for sure. But anything that you want to be brief is, first, what are we talking about? I'm in a meeting. What is the point of this meeting? Why are we meeting now? What are we going to cover, and what's the so what of the meeting? And the so what could be a payoff, it could be an action, it could be an ending, it could be a request, and then it leads to the next engagement. So you follow that, and that's the core brief. Now people know it, then you apply it. You do that, and it becomes significantly different when a person who knows how to do that versus a person who doesn't. The person who doesn't, the listener's got to figure that out. They got to figure out that the executive summary is on their own and rebuild it in their head. It's exhausting. If you do that form, it's called a pre-assembled message. I can say the same thing in half the words, and it's organized in an order that makes sense to the listener. They don't have to reassemble it. That's basically brief. What noise is the environment that we live in is incredibly competitive, and a lot of the things that are competing for our attention aren't worth our attention. But yet we spend a lot of time on it. And I'm not going to hate on technology or social media, because I can go through scrolling dooms like everybody else and go through TikTok, what Instagram Reels is like my guilty pleasure and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like having a diet of popcorn and Diet Coke. It's very filling, but it has no value. So noise is the point of that book is if you're not managing noise, it's probably managing you. If you're not brief, you're probably creating noise for somebody too, which is making them focus on the least important thing. Or in the military, they say the bluff is at the bottom, which spells blab, actually. Bottom line at the bottom. So you're creating blab, you're blabbing, and you're creating noise for people. So that's the point of noise. If you're not managing it, it's managing you. And then quiet works, and I'm not saying this because it just came out, that is the most important thing that's missing in people's day, time alone. And AI is only going to talk about this more. It's only going to play it out. People need to be spending more time alone than they do. And I'm not talking about 6 hours a day, but it's this balance between how I collaborate, how I work together, is driven by how well I work. And people don't spend enough time working alone. And it could be 5 minutes here, a 15-minute appointment in the morning, first thing when I start my day. It could be, I show up to meetings. This is the thing I talk about I show up for meetings 5 minutes early, like a conference call, and nobody's on it. I'm on a Zoom call or Teams call. I just mute the mic, turn the camera off, and I'm by myself. And I use that 5 minutes of quiet to get ready for the conversation I'm going to have. Most people are showing up late. It's just 5 minutes of quiet. It's I call it the secret ingredient. It's like a little piece of your day that goes so far in your day, and people don't spend enough time because they're too busy. They're running around like crazy. And so the big idea in the quiet works is that it actually works, but you have to actually give it a chance.
Awesome. Kind of little foreshadowing there. I'm going to ask you to make a prediction. Will AI make us better or worse communicators?
My answer is better, but the safe safe answer would be both. It'll make us better communicators. AI is like a bullet train. I don't know how fast bullet trains go. Let's say they go 280, 300 miles an hour. When you're on a bullet train, you're not trying to go fast. You're already going fast. So the irony when you're on a bullet train is to slow down, sit down. And when you're prompting AI, you need quiet because you're having the conversation with the smartest person you've ever talked to. I can write some amazing things with AI that makes my writing so much better. If I'm writing it without thinking and I'm having it do it for me, it's going to sound, there's a paint, and it took the world by storm about 5-10 years ago called agreeable gray. If you look it up, it's like everybody who designs houses in agreeable gray. It's like, it's between like beige and light gray. It matches with everything. AI writes in agreeable gray. It sounds like AI. If you haven't thought about it, it sounds generic. It's grammatically correct. It's well structured. It's got bullet points, but it's super predictable. If you read enough of it, you can tell it's AI. You're like, that's AI. Nobody's even thought about it. So it will make us much better writers if we take some quiet in our promptings, in our thinking, in our editing, and our reviewing, and it'll make people just like, immediately everybody's a good writer. You can't be a bad writer with AI, but it'll be a little bit beige.
Let's pause to discuss a primary physical fitness affiliate, Objective Arete, Atomic Athlete. Atomic Athlete is based in Austin, Texas, and is our trusted source for fitness programming expertise. If you want an intelligent, personalized, and sustainable fitness regime, check out their online programs at www.atomicathlete.com. I have personally used their expertise to recover from a back fusion and 2 hip replacements. They have the best programming philosophies that I've come across and pride themselves on having minimal injuries with their methodologies. Check them out at www.atomicathlete.com.
See, I look at it as a tool. Like I wouldn't turn off spell check on my Word documents because I'm a lousy speller. I don't use AI yet for things like that, probably more pride than anything else. I think it will have the possibility of making us lazier, and the quiet will most definitely help because I can't see how quiet doesn't help us, that reflection time, that thinking. But the planning and preparation, I think even with AI, has got to be a piece of it. I mean,
the thing about it is, and we're in very, very early stages of AI. A really, really close friend of mine who actually wrote the foreword to Noise is the chief futurist at Deloitte. This guy's name is Mike Bechtel. Really, really smart guy. Venture capitalist, tech guy, anthropologist, teaches in Notre Dame's grad school. Really, really smart guy. And he talks a lot about AI. And that's one of his biggest things is like the market's just yearning, like, what does this thing mean to humanity? And its power is breathtaking. It's absolutely breathtaking, but you got to play with it. I played with it and it literally blew my mind. And I'm a writer, so I had to write a 3-act play of 2 characters I'd never met before. And it was so good on a first draft, and it took 30 seconds to. So it's way more than a tool. It's literally the thing about language in what it's done. There's a natural, beautiful design of language. Like the way God designed language, it's this massively beautiful formula of how words connect to each other to make meaning. It's mapped the entire, all of language. In there, there's embedded intelligence in that. And it makes it immediately accessible. So people don't even know how to, it's like a black box. You don't have to know how it works. But when you start to play with it, I'm doing stuff in finance right now, like just going through like I'm talking to like the smartest financial advisor I've ever heard. It's incredible, the responses. And I'm like, all right, you just said that. So tell me a little bit more about this other thing. And it's like you're talking to this person. Our lives in the next 5, 10, 15 years are going to just be absolutely significantly different if we take the time, though, to slow down, to sit with it, to talk with it, to prompt it. Because prompting is what you do. You prompt it, you make comments to it, you make adjustments. It's like the smartest research assistant you've ever had.
So instead of asking better questions, prompts a question. You're asking better prompts. It's like
it's like, imagine if you're having a conversation with Elon Musk or some person who's like really, really, really smart. You wouldn't show up to that conversation like, I'm not even thought about what I'm going to talk about. Like you're talking to a brilliant person, like a PhD in like whatever, and you're having that kind of access. And I've tested this with my kids. My kids, most of them are graduated college, and one of my daughters is a civil engineer, another one's a nurse. So I'm like, do you guys use ChatGPT? Do you use AI? And they're like, nah, not really. I've heard about it. I mean, I played with it, whatever. And I'm like, all right. So I asked my daughter's a nurse. Okay, so what are you working on right now? So if you were, give me something that if you had, like, you were treating a patient recently and you were stuck with a treatment recommendation. She told me something and I just said, okay, just say it into the interface, but ask it a question. She looked at me like, that's exactly what I recommended. But I never thought about the other thing. My daughter's a civil engineer. She's doing like road traffic, like technology. I'm like, what are the top 5 firms in Raleigh? And to you, you know, how would you get to the next level of certification in your career? And it was like, the answer was like, done. And she was like, whoa. And my son's at Kentucky right now studying kinesiology. He's like, he uses it to prepare for exam. His friends make fun of him, but he's like, it helps me study. So now he's getting smarter, which just makes me happy because I'm paying for his tuition.
Okay, so no cyborgs and Skynet.
No.
Okay.
It's just going to make us faster and smarter.
Okay. Well, I feel better now. I'll be able to sleep tonight. All right, this is wrap up with this. This is what I'm considering as my final question, my favorite question. And because we're talking about Arete and this excellence through virtue, I think a big piece of that is dealing with adversity, working through the obstacles. Can you tell us about a time when you wanted to quit but didn't? Where were you physically? Where were you mentally?
Quitting is like that's a harsh thing. You're like, I'm going to quit. I'm going to stop doing something. So I suppose I quit during the day on things. I quit on things. Like quitting of the whole thing I'm on right now, I've never gotten to the point where I'm going to quit. Like I'm going to stop doing it because I feel like what I'm doing is it's needed. But man, have I gotten frustrated because it's hard. And what I'm working on right now is it really challenges your belief. And what I'm trying to do right now has taken me 3 years to do, and it's really, really hard. So it's not the quitting part. It's the fact, it's kind of like when you guys in the military, you're climbing, like you're doing these things and you're like, damn, this is so hard. I can't keep on doing this thing. I got to just kind of plug away. It really calls you into your belief every day. And I'm trying to build this thing called a quiet workplace and reimagine how people work. Working alone, working together, combining brief, quiet works, like in an environment that actually is designed for the different types of work we do. And I'm building one here in Southern Pines. And it's taken me 3 years to do it while I'm running a business. And I can't tell you how many times, today included, that I'm just like, this is just absolutely brutal. This is so hard, but it's so important. Anytime you're doing something that's really important, you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't keep on doing this. It's endurance, like stay in the fight kind of thing. You're like, oh my gosh, I gotta, because I'm trying to do this for the betterment of the people that I'm teaching brief to, which is one of the problems I'm asking people is when you're trying to be a better communicator, I ask them a question. In your work environment, where do you go and when do you go for quiet? And the answer is, I don't. That's a problem. It's a huge problem, especially when you start to think about these really great problem solvers that are communicating. If you haven't thought about it because you have no place to think about it alone, because everybody's always constantly bumping into you, then it really starts to mess with your ability to think through a problem before you start collaborating with somebody. And it's an environmental problem. Like the setup of the space is wrong. I didn't grow up in the furniture industry. And now I'm thrust into like how things are laid out next to each other. And what I'm building in Southern Pines is it's the first quiet workplace. And it'll be open by the end of this year. And I'm going to teach people immersive work learning experiences for a week. Come for a couple days and learn a little bit of brief, a little bit of quiet, and then work on stuff together and alone for an entire week in this environment. It's taken me 3 years to do it. Out of the whole business, and man, I can't tell you. I haven't thought about quitting, but taking a nap a couple times, it's a great question.
Well, great. Joe, I can't thank you enough for your time, your insights. Highly recommend all of your books to anybody out there who's listening, a growing audience we're planning on it being. How do people reach you? Where's the best place to come find you to get some quiet?
Directly, I can give you people my email. My email address is jmccormack, so it's JMCCORMACK at sheffieldcompany.com, which is the company I own. And Sheffield owns, sheffieldcompany.com is what you can go to the Brief Lab or to Quiet Workplace and see some of our sites, but send me an email direct.
Awesome. That's very generous too.
Absolutely.
I hope you get 1 million emails.
And all the first ones, like informative, insightful, but not spam, or whatever the fourth one was. No
spam. Well, thank you.
Joe McCormack is an innovator, but not in the usual or obvious ways. Communication is as old as the human race, but Joe has identified noise as the greatest threat to effective communication, and brevity is the greatest tool in combating that. Quiet is the secret weapon for thinking and productivity. If you want to become a better, more effective communicator, functioning at your greatest potential, then you should give Joe's books and the Brief Lab a try. Please like and share this episode and subscribe to the podcast and the Objective Arete newsletter. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and X. Join us next time when our guest will be Ayman Kafel. Ayman talks with us about his personal battles as a cop, a soldier, and a writer, and his mission with Project Sapient to improve how first responders and military veterans think about and cope with stress. Until then, be well and remember, keep your eye on the objective.